not the intent of the.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, it just brings
Maintenance.
back to me we worked hard on updating the facade
Yeah.
program, and to be honest, I feel like I'm not sure we're in a better place than we were. But, you know, it's, there, each request is sort of, has its own unique
Sure,
aspects.
sure.
Again, we're trying to make it streamlined so that the CDA doesn't, because we don't wanna delay things, but I think we do need to revisit, we absolutely need to revisit the program document and make sure. I think we learn more and more every year, and so I think we can maybe focus on some
I
of the
guess
points
in
and get it better.
defense, I don't know what it looked like beforehand. I do like, or what the masonry is like underneath, but I do like the way it was painted. I mean, I think that's a sharp improvement. Those lines, if that was, if that underlies something that's already architecturally there, but that is a good looking building. But I don't know about having it repainted
I think that,
subsequent to
I
that.
think the issue of the owner versus, like, is the owner eligible for 10,000, and is the tenant eligible for another 10,000, is it 20,000 per building? I mean, and I don't remember how we resolved that, or if we did resolve that in the program. But, I mean, maybe a fairer way to do it is by square footage of frontage, so if you're a little front, I mean, if you're a little storefront, should you get 10,000, but that's a corner building, only
It's a
get
big-
10,000, so maybe a more fair way to do it is allocated on square footage of street frontage. But I think if we get into this, to me, it's the building, and if we get into the distinction between who's applying for it, then we're essentially saying we get, 20,000 per building, so.
Well, but part of the dilemma right now with this building is that the owner is not applying for an awning too. It's just, they're applying for the paint.
Yeah.
And if we deal with the paint issue, in most cases, I would think the tenants of a building are the ones that are gonna be applying for the awnings, because they're the ones running the business. The owner of the building is not gonna be applying for another awning usually. They're there as the overall building owner,
Maybe
so.
what we should do is have a separate program for awnings and signs, you know,
Maybe.
and have like a separate
That might
grant
be.
just for that, as
I
opposed to.
think that's it,
Yeah, that might,
Because again, yeah, because there's kind of two, I mean, to me, the facade program, one part is improving the
The
look
actual
and feel
building.
of the building itself.
Yeah,
And I agree with you that the signage and the other thing really is a separate
yeah.
discussion, so that's a
Yeah.
great to me, that. in
Note
the
that
future
down,
might-
Mark.
Write that down, that might
I
clear
have
up
the
some of our.
manual open that I've been putting comments in, so I'm adding this right now.
Yeah, that's a great point,
So
yeah.
I can certainly forward this to.
Okay, but for purposes of this, so I think we obviously need a motion, correct?
did you make the motion, or?
I just made a comment. I move to approve the facade grant application for Alliance Française to Milwaukee.
I'll second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Motion passes. And then we have the review of prior plans, so.
Oh, sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to do this, but just kind of one last point about
Okay.
that. And I don't want to get too far in the
Following
weeds,
Robert's
but
rules.
oftentimes facades and signage is addressed in the leases as a building owner, I know that, between the tenant and the owner. I don't know if we want to be reviewing leases, but it could be the type of thing where it could be the builder, in the lease, the building owner is responsible for that signage. More often than not, but if so, and they're offloading it onto the tenant and planning, well, just go get the money from the village. Just something to know that we might wanna take a peek at that, to say whose responsibility is it for that? If it is the owner's, then they say to the tenant, go apply for it.
And then get over it.
They get it, or they get a quid pro quo notice or something, we'll give you, you know.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, that's some good.
Yeah, cause we have tenants that come,
Because they know there's funding, so they're,
yes.
Yeah.
yes.
So that is, that could be the building owner acting behind the scenes,
Mhm.
cause I have to put up signs for my tenants and stuff, so.
All right.
Alright.
That's
Good enough.
Yeah, that's good. All right, we're now on item 6, review of prior plans. So then this came out of a few of the CDA discussions about sort of the documents that underlie not only our work, but village board work, many of the other committee work. And so just as a sort of an education process, making sure we had a chance to know what those documents were, that we could review them, and then to see if we had any questions. So our original intent was to dedicate a meeting to these documents and sort of talk through and make sure we all have an understanding of those. You know, summertime is tough, obviously, we were not able to find a time that everybody could join, so we said, well, let's just at least, if nothing else, put it on this meeting's agenda and just give it, obviously the documents are quite long, quite involved, so I hope everybody at least had a chance to look at some of them, and if not, you should take some time to look at them. But I would just open it up for conversation to see if anybody had any questions. And actually, I was gonna start it off actually by asking the trustees and village staff to sort of maybe talk about generally, how does the village board use these documents? Are they referenced fairly frequently? Do they drive a lot of decisions? And then staff, kind of, how do these documents, how are they used kind of in your day-to-day work, or are they not? So I think just to provide a level of context for us. So I don't know who wants to start on that. Sorry to put you on the spot, but I was just interested in.
I can start briefly
Yeah.
with day-to-day when people approach me. I mean, that's the main question, is what does the village see for this particular site or this particular building?
Yeah.
I definitely reference the master plan, and if it has, some information in there, I definitely say, this is not a finalized, it could be other things, right? It's not set in stone, but in general, in the process, 2007 and 2014, this is what had come up. But we are in the process of always looking at these things continually, so, it came up last night. Design Review Board, as we'll see in the future, they reviewed demolition of the Queensway cleaners and the house behind it. That was the one question, is what does the village see there, right? So the master plan shows it as a 3-story mixed-use building in the front with a 2-story step down in the back. Once again, that's just a generalized thought. So I reference it largely in those
And again,
respects.
you're specifically speaking of the target sites that are listed in.
Correct.
Yes, yep.
Very rarely is it used generally. People will come to us looking at specific sites, or we provide that to them as a guide, but,
Okay.
so I've used it in the same way. So it's on my desktop, and when people call or people have interest, this is what I flip to.
I view it as, I think my view aligns with yours in that I view it as kind of a reference guide and kind of a, what's the strategy, what's the high level, how do we see, this property being developed, for instance, when we talk about I obviously wasn't on the board for these, but,
Right.
When we talk about these larger documents that we're creating, be it the traffic study, the housing study, I view them as driving our strategy around, how we're gonna treat traffic, how we're gonna treat housing, and these are similar for the subject areas which they discuss.
Yeah, I think, I do think it was interesting exercise for me to go back and look at
Yeah,
them.
me too.
Because I do think, well, for one thing, the market has changed
Yes.
so much from even 2014. And I think we're dealing, I think we're dealing largely with issues of gentrification right now, especially on the west side, at least that's something, let's use the expert, but I see housing prices on the west side, which used to be a place where there was relatively more affordable housing and entry-level housing for families. And that's kind of, it's harder and harder to find an entry-level house in Shorewood, and I feel the market's really changed. So that's one thing. But you have to kind of look, but there are certain goals, I think, from these plans that were which have resulted in the multifamily apartments, along Oakland.
Yes.
Which in the comprehensive plan, it's interesting, there was continue village and school district joint effort analyzing school enrollment. I think trying to keep Shorewood as a place of families and support enrollment in the school district was sort of one of the guiding principles, and I think the thought was, well, let's build higher end apartments and give place for older people to stay in Shorewood and move from a house to an apartment and then open up more single family housing. I'd be curious to know what if that's worked. I'm not sure that the market does what the market does. I'm not sure that that's really exactly what's happened. But I think that was one of the, it's what are the underlying goals? Who are we looking to accommodate? Older people, I mean, how much does Harbor Chase, I mean, I guess the Oaks maybe is more, although the Oaks is pretty expensive. And Harbor Chase, I mean, I'm not sure how much of a Shorewood amenity that is. I mean, I think that's more regional. So, I don't know, I'm kind of rambling here, but I mean, I think if we wanted, if our goal was still to say we want to make opportunities for family housing to make sure our school enrollment stays, doesn't fluctuate, especially given the recent investment the voters decided to make in the school district, I think it's important that we keep enrollment up. I mean, I would think like, market or slightly more affordable family level housing, even rental housing, kind of like Estabrook Gardens, that kind of housing is what we should be looking at, So I mean, I think it's sort of there's a philosophy underneath it, and I think it's a good opportunity to sort of re-examine that,
That's what I took from this, is that obviously there was a lot of work that went into what the philosophy and the approach, and to me the question is that still
Yeah.
valid?
Yeah.
And what's the process by which the village board, the CDA, and all the entities sort of look at that and say, do we still agree with this approach? Is this still what we want to do? And if not, are we changing? Because you're right, I think everybody can read this and read different things into it and say, this is our goal, whereas, and maybe we're not necessarily all on the same page. Because I agree, we hear a lot about the elder housing, but we also hear a lot about the maintaining the beginning end to get the younger families in, for the
Yeah.
schools. I mean, I think those are fairly consistent themes across all the documents and across the history of Shorewood, so.
Well, and I think the increase in housing single family housing prices, I mean, when we moved here 15 years ago or so, there were $275,000 houses that you could get, on Sheffield or somewhere on that side of town, and they're harder and harder to find now. So, I do think there's a relationship between that and school enrollment, although I know there are families who live in the Mosaic, but I don't know if it's just like a temporary thing until they can find a house, or how many, maybe Michael knows how many families actually are settled.
There are a lot of families in the Lighthorse. I
Oh,
was
really?
really, and maybe the Mosaic too, I don't know, but a lot of families, and some have moved there and are gonna stay there as a family, but a lot of them are also looking for houses.
Yeah.
Well, then I guess I get back to as you said, the market is the market. I mean, I'm not, what control do we have or want to have over, right? I mean, I think we sort of set out, these are our goals and desires, but,
Yeah,
we're not in the business of,
psychology.
yeah.
No, I agree. Just speaking anecdotally, like the woman who lives across the street from me, her garden, she's not gonna give it up. And my wife works in in-home patient care, and they're offloading so many people out of assisted living facilities so they can stay in their homes longer, which is directly working against what I think was trying to be accomplished with those apartments. I also know people that are trying to move here, who have retired and their kids are gone, because they want a yard, because they don't wanna live in the third ward, because there's no dirt there. So, I mean, you're working against personal
Mm-hmm.
behavioral decision, which is hard. And I think the goal is noble, and I would support it, but it's just hard to know what people, like the lady who lives across the street from me, she's by herself now, and she's gonna stay there until someone tells her she has to leave. So, it's hard to.
People don't wanna move,
Yeah.
they wanna stay in their house.
Yeah, and
They wanna own, they don't wanna rent,
Yeah.
they don't wanna give their equity to somebody else, they wanna own. And we've probably reached a saturation point on commercial properties, rentals right now. That's my observation, people won't move because they don't have that option to own. So future development, and that's part of this housing study that is so interesting to see the direction that the trends that are occurring right now in the marketplace. We adjusted for those trends with Cornerstone when they allowed them to convert their condo project into an apartment project.
Mm-hmm.
And since then, everything has become an apartment project, and they've had success. But you're gonna reach a saturation point where the apartments are no longer feasible. And it's probably about 2 years out nationally,
Oh,
so.
Or sort of the volumes
Yeah.
gotten to it, right?
Mhm. And if people had an option to own, there's probably a lot of people in Lighthorse or Mosaic that would love to own one of those apartments, or Cornerstone, for example. They just don't have that option.
Mhm.
And that may happen at some point in time too, where they may convert. That's our Lighthorse is notorious is the wrong word, but his business plan is to upgrade and liquidate periodically. And he may end up selling that building off to somebody whose intentions are to convert to private ownership, individual units, which of course would benefit our tax base because individual units are worth more than the whole.
Erica, did you?
No, I just remember working on for almost 2 years the residential loan program, down payment assistance and stuff. We worked with Wells Fargo and North Shore Bank, we were trying to figure out what does this look like, can you help? And both the banks were saying that this is not a starter home community. I just remember that, so we talked about that $5,000 down payment. Will that be utilized, or, yeah, so they both said it's not a first home buyer's market in Shorewood back in 2007, 2008.
It is right now because the interest rates being
Are
so low.
Yeah.
If interest rates go up 2%, that's gonna change the dynamics of everything in here.
Well, interest rate's one thing, but the price of the home
It'll
is.
drive.
Well, they're related
prices
because you're
to
flattening
flatten
monthly
out
payment,
pretty
yeah.
quickly. 2% right now, interest rates are